Let me begin by thanking all of y'all for being here. I mean, I know it's a cold evening in San Francisco, California. It doesn't really get that cold. Actually, West Texas is much colder. Anyway, so I really want to thank all of you for being here, and also for Immigrants Rising in hosting this event. I mean, like, my connection with Immigrants Rising goes back like many, many years, actually, when I was much younger, before I went to college, which was a long time ago. So I'll tell you a little bit about that connection. And then I also just want to thank Immigrants Rising for continuing to support undocumented young people and undocumented families, and making impactful changes in our communities across the country, not just here in California. Okay, so this slide has a little bit of my background with me working with Immigrants Rising to establish their entrepreneurship resources, and then being able to travel. Even though I was a DACA recipient, I was able to travel 5 times to different places around the world, but it was not very easy because most people didn't know what DACA was, including the Border Patrol agents that would let me in. So in different situations, I almost got left behind in Ireland one time, which I guess wouldn't be a bad place to be left behind in. But I don't drink, so I guess that wouldn't work for me. But anyway, and of course here you have His Holiness, the Dalai Lama. He is amazing, and I've been blessed to be blessed by him. And it has a connection with my entrepreneurship story, so I probably won't go into that in this talk. Well, let me first start off with my personal story, which you can probably Google, so I'm not going to go into it too deeply. I'm just going to relate to you kind of my background. So I was born in Pakistan. How many of you have heard of Pakistan? Yeah, it's not Pakistan, it's Pakistan. Okay, cool. So it's actually next to India, so a lot of people are like, is that the same as India? And I'm like, no, it's not. Please don't compare Pakistan to India, because we don't like each other. Okay. So I was born in the city of Karachi. It's right on the bottom over here. And then I moved to Lahore, which is up there on the top right, sort of very close to the border of with India, actually. So I've been very close to India, actually. If I stepped over the gate, I'd be in India, and that's not a good thing, at least for me at that time. So that's where I was born. That's where I lived until I was 11.8, actually. And that's when I moved to Fort Worth, Texas. And let me tell you a little bit about Texas. All right, here's Texas. Here's how we think of it. So Texas makes up most of the United States. It's the best state. Everything's bigger and better in Texas. And, you see California over there, your geography, and it says it's unmentionable. And I'm here in San Francisco. Can you believe it? So my grandparents actually moved to Fort Worth, which is a different city than Dallas. It's where the West begins, and it's a much cooler city than Dallas. So I moved to Fort Worth, Texas, because my grandparents moved there in the late 80s, early 90s. I was very young, so I don't remember. But so they moved here back when one of my aunts was able to sponsor for them, and through the family immigration system, they were able to come here. And then once they became citizens, they actually opened up a business, a very successful business, and they also applied for the rest of my mom's siblings to come to the United States. And so a lot of them came, they became naturalized citizens. By the time my mom got her green card queue, basically, we were somewhat approved. We just needed to finish the interview process. By that time, my grandfather actually fell very ill, unfortunately. So during that time, this was early 2004, that's when we were deciding to move here, move to Texas. And unfortunately, by the time my mom was able to come over, my grandfather passed away the night after she arrived. And then we moved to the United States about a few weeks later. That was in 2004 when I was 11.8 years old. So I don't remember a whole lot. But I do remember immediately and distinctly knowing that I would probably become undocumented because my petitioner, which was my grandfather, passed away. And so that's kind of a young age to, I don't know, be learning about the rest of your life here in the United States, this new home, right, that you call this land of opportunity that you've been so excited to come to. Anyway, so that was a little bit of my background. So for the next couple of years, we were renewing our visitor visas. We kept renewing. Then at some point, we could not renew our visitor visas any longer, which meant that we would have to be here undocumented. And my dad, he was faced with the very difficult decision of figuring out, okay, like, should we go back? Pakistan wasn't doing too great, if you've heard of Osama bin Laden, Abbottabad, all that. So there was a lot of bad things going on, actually, where we lived in Lahore. Bombings, places like our own building that we lived in was affected. Oh, okay, there's that. That's not me. Okay, and so it was not a good place to go back to. And as any dreamer parent has thought, bringing your kids to America is giving them an opportunity, giving them a new life, giving them endless educational opportunities. And that's what my parents did. So that's why we decided to stay and live here undocumented instead of going back. So yeah, I didn't mean to get to this slide so quickly, but since I have already gotten to it, I will get to talking about how I decided on coming to West Texas for college. So I came to Fort Worth when I was almost 12, and then I spent my entire youth there. And then when it came time to graduating from high school, I did not know if I could even go to college, right? And it was actually thanks to E4FC, which Immigrants Rising was called, Educators for Fair Consideration before. It was actually thanks to their website that I found out that I could actually go to college. I was sitting in Fort Worth, Texas, on their website, and I was researching, can I go to school? I'm undocumented. And then I found their website, and that's when I learned, okay, if you are in certain states and you qualify as a resident of that state, you might have the DREAM Act version of that state, and then you can go to college. And that's when I learned, okay, I can go to college here in Texas, and I'm a Texas resident. And that was due to what Rick Perry signed back in 2001 called the Texas DREAM Act, which was actually signed long before California did it. So that's kind of cool, I think. And that's where, my talk is, a lot of it is about kind of looking at the ironies of life and looking at the dichotomies of life. So I find this to be very ironic, right? Like a super red state, and Rick Perry, as you know him, you might think, okay, this is really strange. Like, how does this work, right? But I actually spoke with him about this. Daniel took these photos of many years ago, and I told him, hey, I'm a DACA recipient, and thank you for doing this. And this is when I was still at Texas Tech, and I told him, because of the Texas DREAM Act, I'm able to be here at this university, and thank you for doing that. And he was, clearly he was very happy, and he's like, yes, I am very glad that this happened, and that you're able to go to college, because he actually, and this is Kathy mentioned earlier, this is a space where we can share all these things, so I'm sharing this with you. He actually was very positive about this, and he said, I'm really glad that this was able to happen and that you're a Red Raider now. I think it doesn't make sense that you grew up here and that you can't go to school in our state. Anyway, so that was our conversation, so it's really cool. Anyway, so I went to Texas Tech, and do y'all know that guy up there on the top right? Buddy Holly, good job. I have prizes later, I'll give you something. So Buddy Holly was born in 1936 in Lubbock, Texas. So I went from Fort Worth to Lubbock, over there in the Panhandle, right? And that's where he was born, so there's not a lot of great things about West Texas besides the flat lands and the great sunsets and stars, because there's not a lot of light pollution. And also Buddy Holly was born there, so that's really cool. And tons of cotton. So when I drive from Fort Worth to Lubbock, we stop and pick cotton. It's kind of cool. It's very rough. It doesn't look like what you think. Not like cotton balls that you buy at Walgreens. Anyway, so West Texas, Texas kind of embraced me. I was undocumented. Remember, this is before DACA came about. This was 2011. I talked to the Honors College at Texas Tech. I told them, hey, I don't have a social security number. Like, I don't even know how to get to college, and I know I can because I'm a Texas resident. And they said, hey, that's fine. Like, just come on in. We'll just use your Raider ID. And remember, these are people who are not really quite aware, and this is Texas, they're not aware of like how to help undocumented students. Now that landscape has changed quite a bit, especially here in California, but in Texas we still need a lot of help. And then, so I studied mathematics in my undergrad, and then I continued to stay there to finish my PhD in mathematical biology. And then the last few months, I've been here in San Francisco working at the Chan Zuckerberg BioHub, doing data science and math bio things. And then because I live in this nerdy world, I have here Lur from Futurama. I don't know, maybe some of you don't know who he is. Daniel watches it, that's why I know of it. And we have a server named Lur, so it's kind of hilarious, I think. Anyway, so I will move forward. So as I mentioned, most of my talk, the topic of my talk is kind of looking into the ironies and dichotomies of life, the polarity of moments. And this is a quote that really always reminds me of kind of the immigrant narrative, the immigrant life, right? And our time here in America. So I had to actually write an essay in AP English in high school. This was like a really long time ago. And it was about, adversity and how it has changed me and my personal life, and how it can be a catalyst for us to really find newfound talents, right? So I feel like immigrants in this country are always doing that, right? And that's like where entrepreneurship is born. And I spoke about this earlier, and Immigrants Rising is doing a great job of promoting entrepreneurship, because that's really like our way of like helping ourselves, right? Because as you know, DACA and the DREAM Act and all of that, it's all going downhill. Okay, so in general, adversity is the biggest strength, I feel like, that defines our stories. And entrepreneurship and innovation, for example, is a product of adversity, and probably the main reason why immigrants are thriving entrepreneurs. So we have many successful stories of entrepreneurship here in this very room, and you'll get to see that more later. So then another fascinating story about irony and dichotomy is Steve King. So I met Steve King. He's a Republican congressman from Iowa, and we all really don't like him. And yeah, I hope you don't like him. But so we met. Actually, I was not in DC at that time to do DACA stuff. I was there representing my student government of my university, and I met with him, and I told him what I was studying, and he said, "Oh, can we talk about cloning?" And he went on and on, and we talked about cloning cows and science, and he was like, "Okay, can we clone humans yet?" And I'm like, "Oh my God, did you really just ask that? Like, do you know what you're talking about?" Anyway, so we had this really crazy talk about like science and technology, how rapidly science and technology is growing. And his staffer was there saying, "Hey, Congressman, we gotta go. And he's like, no, I'm having fun talking with her. Like, this is like really what excites me. And he like studied biology when he was in undergrad. And so we keep talking, and then at the very end, I kind of, dropped the bomb, and I said, "Oh, by the way, Representative King, I'm actually a DACA recipient, so because of me having a work permit, and because of me, having that benefit, I've been able to stay in school and pursue my PhD." So I quickly told him my story, and he completely turned red. He'd been drinking too, and he was like, "Oh, whoa, well, just know that we're here with you and that we support you. Okay, take care." And then he had to run. So this was a crazy story, because like here he is, and I didn't have DACA written on my forehead. So we were just talking about science and technology, and then he leaves eventually when I tell him about my personal story. So anyway. Okay, so I will tell you one last big, very personal story about when ICE came to get my family back in 2012, February 14th, 2012. That was when, as undocumented families all over our country, that is a moment that we all really dread, right? Because obviously you don't want ICE to show up at your door. And if somebody had actually reported us to the ICE office in Dallas, so they came up on that date to come and to my parents' place. This was in 2012, so I was in Lubbock at that time as a freshman in college. So at home, my parents were there, my two sisters were there. So they come in, it's like 4 a.m., they've surrounded the entire apartment complex where my parents live, and they, were obviously like prepared just in case, my parents were gonna like flee or do something crazy. So they come in there, and my dad actually opens a door, and he immediately realizes what this is about. So he actually invites them in, and he says, "Come inside, sit in my living room, and do you want some tea? Do you want something to drink?" And the ICE officer's like, "Wait, hold on, like, this is not supposed to be happening. Like, I'm supposed to be banging on your door, and you're supposed to not be opening, and this is really strange." So they kind of examine my parents' apartment and kind of look around, and they see like, wow, this is just like a place where they live. They have a life here. They are not running away. These are normal people. And so my dad got all the passports because they wanted that. So they took the passports away, and they, my dad actually had a very interesting conversation with them that morning. And, the ICE officers mentioned, we are very hated because of the job that we do. But after all, we're only humans too. That really stuck with my dad and with my sisters and my mom, because how is it that, they are obviously in the immigration movement and in general, like, ICE is generally not a good thing, and ICE agents are, like, them showing up at your door is certainly not a good thing for you as an undocumented family, but at the same time, the agents who are wearing this uniform are also humans, and they presented that to my dad, and they said, like, we're glad that you're complying with us, and this is amazing. Like, we're going to be nice to you. So instead of like them arresting my parents right away, they had my parents show up the next morning, and then they called me because they were like, "Where were you?" They're like, "There's another little child that's missing from here." And so, but luckily so I had many conversations with them while I was in Lubbock, and instead of coming to campus and taking me out of class, they were very cognizant of my schedule, and they waited until I could come back to Fort Worth so that I could come back and do my fingerprinting. So I have this figure here because for the following years, we were in this intensive supervision program that ICE has put together. This is where these words are taken from this memo. This is where they monitor individuals that are released into the community. I feel like this is very interesting language and choice of words. This is where the individuals under this program have to abide by structured reporting requirements, which included us having these phone calls where they knew our voices, so we would have to repeat numbers after some robot, and that's how they knew. Then those phone calls would come at a certain time or times during the week, and if we didn't pick that up, we would I guess they would come and find us and figure out why we weren't picking up the phone call. And then unscheduled home visits. So if they come home to our place and they see that we're not there, that is really bad, right? So this was a very crazy program that they put my parents under and myself. But after a few years of going through that, as you know, DACA came about, and when we had our immigration hearing, the judge was able to close my case because he couldn't actually deport me. So the ICE thing happened February 2012, and then our hearing was in 2013 February. So in that time period, DACA came about, and literally I was saved by the bell because the judge could have directly removed me right then. But unfortunately, he put my parents in final removal proceedings, sending them back to the nation of Pakistan. So currently, they're still coming out of that right now and then trying to adjust their status. So that's our brief situation with ICE. And I guess I just want to quickly end with a little bit about the immigration movement, and obviously you're here because you're aware of it. You know that next week is a big day at the Supreme Court on the 12th, and we hope that things will be okay, and obviously we won't know the results until much later. But Anyway, so I will leave you with a few words. So I wrote this many years ago when I was asked to write a letter to President Obama, and this is what I wrote. So, a country we call home is our greatest gift, and we're only millions of dreamers, including our parents, who are the original dreamers. We live in this land we call home, yet solely due to lack of legislative immigration solutions, we struggle with having the rights that we deserve, the opportunities that we're capable of earning, and the inability to live with freedom. Yet, we ride on in this dream journey of ours and dance through the obstacles as that is what we believe is the American spirit. So, I will leave you with this closing question, and hopefully later on when you have some time to reflect, you will have some good ideas about this question. So, thank you all so much for listening.